what does the Rambam say about Kriyas Shofar and Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos? Rabbi Baruch Chaim just put out something in writing earlier today about his opposition to the what's going to be happening. Rosh Hashanah is going to be on Shabbos this year, at least according to the current calendar. And it happened 3 years ago also. That was remarkable. It happened 3 years ago. Why? Because we went like a span of 12 years without Rosh Hashanah being on a Shabbos. It was just one of those quirks of the calendar, and also Rosh Hashanah wasn't on a Tuesday. It was basically just Mondays or Thursdays for an entire decade. Okay, Rosh Hashanah was only Monday, Thursday for like entire decade. And then finally it happened 3 years ago. They Rosh Hashanah was on Shabbos, and as you know, generally speaking, we don't sound the shofar on Shabbos. And there are those who are claiming, for whatever reason, we should, or at least they did. I remember reading about this among Rabbanim in the Old City, who people claim they formed the Beis Din, and they are going to be sounding the shofar. And other rabbis are like, no, you can't do that. It's not halachically valid, but tell us what time you're doing it so we can come and watch. Okay, we can come and attend. And there are those who claim such a thing. You should know they do have a slight basis. After all, the Rif did it. The Rif is not a nobody. It's a well-known position of the Rif. It's in the Rif. It's in the Rosh. It's mentioned in the Torah. They say the Rif, the way he understood the Gemara we're about to see, believed that his Beis Din was a pretty decent Beis Din that met his qualifications as he understood the Gemara. So he sounded the shofar. The Rif did this. And it says also, and all the Talmidim of the Rif said, no, the Rif is wrong. This can't do that. Okay, so it's let's look at this on the inside. Rabbi Baruch Chaim is opposed, and someone asked me, so what's your opinion? I said, well, you don't need my opinion. I can just tell you what the Rambam says, and I can show you what the Shulchan Aruch says, and I can show you what the Vilna Gaon says, and it seems to fit what the Yerushalmi say. They're all pe'echad, that it should not be, can fulfill certain conditions, and unless the situation radically changes soon, they will not fulfill those conditions. So let's begin. You guys have the Marmakomos? Let's see it. Here, the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim Tuf Kuf Pei Chet. That's Mark 588, section 5. What? I sent it in the group. Binyamin sent it to everybody. So it's a PDF. Look in updates. You want me to resend it to you? Here, let me send it to you personally.
If I could receive a voicemail with all the notes.
You want to receive? Oh, so you just listen. Hold on 1 sec. Here, send this to you. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, let's see. If anybody has trouble seeing this, please tell me. Where'd it go? I had it on the screen. Now I lost it.
I was lucky I had my laptop.
Okay, we're doing it in. I'm not using PDF. I'm using the Word document or the Pages document, so I can make changes as necessary. Sometimes I find some typos. The Shulchan Aruch there says that Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah Shechal Yot b'Shabbat Ein Tokin b'Shofar. When Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos, we do not sound the shofar. Now that's a little bit inaccurate. Read what the Vilna Gaon there says. He's a good introduction, and I ask you to be very medayik in what the Gra is saying here. Why don't you sound the shofar? The Masha Kathav Sham Beit Din de Akrai in the Gemara there in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Kaftet. It says a temporary Beis Din, a Beis Din that's not called Akrai or Arai. Arai seems to be another form of Akrai. Okay, they're opposites of Kavua. Okay, Beis Din Akrai. The way the Vilna Gaon reads this, he says, and the way that the Vilna Gaon's explained the Shulchan Aruch's opinion is, you could have a Beis Din Akrai, but a proper Beis Din sound the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, mikol makom Beit Din samuch be'Eretz Yisrael b'Inan. But we would require a court that is properly ordained in Eretz Yisrael. You need proper smicha. The judges have to be properly ordained. That's what the Vilna Gaon says. The opinion that we follow is, like the Shulchan Aruch, if you had a Beis Din that was properly ordained, 3 men, proper rabbis who, is there smicha today? So far, we'll see. Whatever it is. So then you could have this. That's the opinion of whom? Rambam and other poskim. The Vilna Gaon then adds, V'Rashi v'Rosh v'Tur katavu Beit Din shel kaf gimel b'Inan. According to Rashi, the Rosh and the Tur, the way they understand the Gemara, you need a Beis Din of 23. Now, the Beis Din of 23, not necessarily musmachim. Why don't we put together Bati Din of 23? Most Bati Din here in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz are how many? 3. Why can't you put together, if you could put together a Beis Din of 3, why can't you do 5, 7, or 23?
Capital case.
Yeah, but still, you don't. So we're not judging capital cases, but you can still put together a Beis Din of 23 if you wanted to. They wouldn't have the power to do capital cases, but still, you can still have a beis din.
What's the benefit? That's like the big.
Well, the benefit is right here. According to Rashi, Rosh, and the Torah, you could have. What's up? Hold on, we have a question there. What? Okay, I guess that's not a question. Sorry. So you could. There's other advantages to having a beis din of 23. Okay.
It's more people. Everybody's saying their opinion.
Yeah. Okay, and they deliberate, and you could get.
Don't let him put his feet on the floor.
Please stop unmuting yourself. Thanks. Yeah.
Can you do the same thing with 71? 71?
No, there's no reason. You don't have unless like the beis din has to make a decision.
No, they have to do the smoking, don't they? You have a Sanhedrin.
One second. What? 1 second. Okay. Hold on 1 second. Okay. I have to do this. Let's get some quiet there. Okay. So what are you saying? Yeah, whatever. You need this condition, and according to the Rif, kulam cholkul al Rif. They all disagree with the Rif. What's the Rif's classic opinion? It's well known. Shevafarish be'ezo beis din muflag. You just need a beis din muflag, and the Rif considered himself. By the way, everybody considered the Rif's beis din muflag. But the whole question is, they didn't agree with the Rif's assessment of this halacha. And he says, check out the Rosh says. The Rosh brings that, and by the way, here's what the Rif did, and no one agreed with him. None of his Talmidim listened to him or accepted what the Rif had to say. So we'll go see where these three opinions come from. And I'd like to point out that the Rambam's opinion is the one that I think fits most with the Yerushalmi. That's the thesis tonight. Here you have Hilchos Shofar. The Rambam's Hilchos Shofar, the Rambam says, Ein tokin b'shofar b'chol makom. He says, even when Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos, you can't do it in every place. Not everybody gets to sound the shofar. I think the Vilna Gaon was hinting at, the Shulchan Aruch says you can't blow shofar. Ain't talking about shofar. And the Vilna Gaon says, yeah, because you don't have a beis din, implying that if you had the conditions, you could. The Shulchan Aruch is written sort of shorthand. Really, there is a way to sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, on Shabbos. You just have to find the conditions, right? It's not just a blanket prohibition. That's what the Vilna Gaon, that's what the Rambam says. Ain't toking b'shofar b'chol makom. Not everywhere do you sound the shofar. The part I'm highlighting here is kishe gazru shelo ditkol b'Shabbat lo gazru el b'makom she'ein bo beit din. They only made this gzeira against shofar blowing on Shabbos where there isn't a beis din. Bizman she'ha mikdash kayam ve'ya beit din agdol b'Yerushalayim ayu kulam toking b'Yerushalayim b'Shabbat kol zman she'beit din yoshvim. When the Sanhedrin was in Jerusalem, everybody in Jerusalem and all other places, that could see Jerusalem, he's going to add, they could sound the shofar on Shabbos. And he says, once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, any place where you have a Beis Din Kavua and it's Samuch Ba'aretz, Tokin Bo B'Shabbat, they can have it. If they have proper ordination, they could sound the shofar on Shabbos. And he says it's only done in the Beis Din, by the way, that was actually the ones that sanctified the moon. They're the ones who set the calendar. They're the ones who declared Rosh Chodesh, which, by the way, is a condition that no beis din, to my knowledge, has fulfilled. We're still using the calendar. That would be basically a Sanhedrin or a beis din that's a stand-in for the Sanhedrin. Why is this important? Because the Rambam brings elsewhere, reported by Chazal, that sometimes it wasn't the Sanhedrin that decided Rosh Chodesh. There's a case where Rabbi Akiva had to make an ad hoc beis din, a small ad hoc beis din, in order to do Kiddush HaChodesh. Sometimes you can't use the Sanhedrin. You just have to find the biggest rabbi around and two musmachim in Eretz Yisrael to do it, which is an important point, which is part of his disagreement with Rashi. Other batei din ain't talking about him alpha and shein smuchim. Even if the beis din is samuch in Eretz Yisrael, the Rambam says it's not sufficient. They have to have done Kiddush HaChodesh. Rashi doesn't have that condition. The Rif doesn't have that condition. Why does the Rambam have this condition specifically that had to be the ones who did Kiddush HaChodesh? Why would the Rambam say such a thing? And why would the other Rishonim disagree with him? You understand the Rambam's condition?
Well, okay, so
yeah,
they're the same Beit Din that is by deciding Kiddush HaChodesh. So they're deciding when Rosh Hashanah is.
Yeah, the ones who decided basically Rosh Hashanah or have previously done it, if they're that big a beis din that they're the ones who actually set the calendar once. So they're the ones who can sound the shofar.
They're the ones who are deciding when the shofar is blown on Shabbat.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I don't know if that means anything, but
it does. It means something. But the problem is, the question before us is, why does the Rambam consider this a halacha, and the other major Rishonim, the Rif and the Rosh, don't hold of it? Are they using different Gemaras, perhaps? Remember, the Rashi, Rosh, and Tur only required a base din of 23, and the Rif said a base din muflog. So obviously, they disagree with how to understand the source material. And the Rosh similarly has, there's a similar halacha in Shemitah and Yovel. The Rambam mentions Rosh HaShanna shechalios b'Shabbos. I should say this: when Yovel Rosh Yom Kippur is on Shabbos, you blow the shofar. There's no takana against Yovel's shofar on Shabbos. Basically, the Yovel Yom Kippur, you blow shofar there on, just like you do on every Rosh Hashanah, but more so. Everybody has to do it themselves, not just a shliach tzibur doing it for everybody. Everybody's got to pick up the shofar and sound it. And they say Malchios, Sefaros, and shofars as part of the Musaf. So that's special for Yovel. And the Rambam says there was never a gzera against this, but there is a gzera against sounding the shofar on Shabbos when it's Rosh Hashanah. And Rav Kapach brings the Shor Shayam, who explains because they never made a gzera, because every single Yom Kippur, including Yom Kippur of Yovel, if it's on Shabbos, is already a Shabbos. If the Yom Kippur Yovel, by the way, the Yovel Yom Kippur falls out on Shabbos, how often? About 2 out of every 7 Yovels. Okay, do the math. It falls out 2 out of every 7 Yovels, at least according to our set calendar. 2 out of every 7 Yovels, Yom Kippur will be Shabbos. How often is that? 7 Yovels is 350 years. So twice every 350 years, this is nafka mina on average. Okay, so the Shor Shayam is saying every Yom Kippur is as chamur as a Shabbos, right? Rosh Hashanah is just a yontif, so you understand why there's a gzera. Shema Yotzi, the Rishus Rabbim, right? But that's only the special case where Rosh Hashanah coincides with Shabbos. So now the Isser Malacha is more severe. So we have to make a takana to protect Shabbos. But the mitzvah of Yovel on Yom Kippur is always on a day that's technically Shabbos. Yom Kippur is just as chamur as Shabbos. It has all the Yisurim Malacha, none of the heters that the yontifs enjoy. So they never made a gzera thereon. So here the Rambam mentions that once again, the condition for sounding the shofar on Shabbos, on Rosh Hashanah, is based in that Kidshu HaSachodesh. They're the ones who established the new moon.
Just to clarify,
Yes, please.
is this the Beth Din that declared that it's Rosh Hashanah, or is it any court at any time that has ever sanctified the moon?
That's a good question. So it seems that this is one. There is one way. We're going to see a proof here that it seems to be, according to one thing in the Yerushalmi, the ones who actually declared that Rosh Chodesh, that Rosh Hashanah, are the ones who are also sounding the shofar. But the ambiguity of the language does leave room open. Just like they have to be smuchim, could be the ones who at one point had done it. We'll look for the diukim as we look into the sources. Okay. I think, just because I should learn this 101 times, but my gut is telling me I think I could find it, that some say in the Rambam that it just means a base din that at one point had done this, but not necessarily did it this particular year. Okay, but we're going to see an argument for the other side. Okay, good. So let's look over here. Let's look into the Gemara. Open up your Gemaras to Rosh Hashanah Kaf Tesam and Beis. It's right at the beginning of the 4th parak. The Mishnah gives the basic line: Yom Tov she Rosh Hashanah shechaliot b'Shabbat b'Mikdash hayu tokina aval lo b'Medina. When Rosh Hashanah was Shabbos, in the Mikdash they sound the shofar, but not in the Medina. And that's also machlokas Rishonim. What is Mikdash and what's Medina? The Rambam says Mikdash in this case isn't Har Bayis, like he usually says, but rather, like he says in a few Mishnayos, it means the city of Jerusalem, at least the walled city of Jerusalem. And Medina means everywhere else in Eretz Yisrael. Whereas Rashi says otherwise. Mikdash and Medina is, the city, the walled city of Jerusalem. So it's a machlokas there already. The point is, Mikdash, they sound the shofar. Outside the Mikdash, they do not, whatever Mikdash is. Mm-hmm. And then it says, once the temple was destroyed, Rabban Yochanan Zakkai made a takana that they should sound the shofar, every place where there's a base din. What does that mean? That's the crux of all this argument. Rabbi Elazar responded, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai only said such a thing in Yavne Bilvad. Only the base din in Yavne. I included here green. This is Rashi's statement. Rashi explains, Yavne was where the Sanhedrin was, and any place where the Sanhedrin went after that, okay, but not in the basin of 23, implying that the statement of the Tanakama is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's standard was for sounding the shofar any basin of 23. A place where the basin of 23 they could sound the shofar. Rabbi Elazar says no, it has to be a Sanhedrin. That's Rashi's understanding of this statement in the Mishnah. The Rambam doesn't understand it this way. You understand that argument? The Tanakama, according to Rashi, says basin of 23 can sound the shofar after the temple is destroyed. That's the Takana. Rabbi Elazar said no, just the Sanhedrin, 71 and the 71. Okay, and then they responded to him, whoever they is, the Umrulo. This is the third voice in the Mishnah. We had Tanakama, Rabbi Elazar, now an Umrulo. Okay, the Umrulo says Echad biyavne ve'echad kol makom sheish bo beistin. No, not just Yavne, any place that has a beistin, which Rashi would say is no, any beistin, any Sanhedrin, and any beistin of 23. Okay, so and I put this over here. Rashi Tanakama diber beveistin shel kaf gimel. That's the way the Rashi says elsewhere. That's the way the Torah and the Rosh point out that Rashi's saying. It's pretty clear. It's what Rashi says. So the Gemara asks a question. The Gemara says Benahani Mili. What this distinction between Shabbos and everywhere else, Mikdash and everywhere else? There's a general rule: don't sound the shofar except in the Mikdash, right? Or don't sound the shofar on this Rosh Hashanah Shabbos unless you have a beistin, whatever that means. Where do you get such a distinction, right? So the Gemara says there's, I guess you could call this a drasha. Is it a drasha? When Rosh Hashanah is described in Vayikra, it's called Shabbaton Zichron Teruah, and in the Book of Numbers, it's described as Yom Teruah. So is it a day of Zichron Teruah or actual Teruah? And what's the difference between those two terms? So he says there's no kasha. Some is Shabbos, some is Yontif. That is, it's actual Yom Teruah when Rosh Hashanah is a weekday. It means day of sounding of the shofar. And it's a Zichron Teruah, which means just remember that you're supposed to do Teruah. Recount that you're supposed to sound the shofar when it's Shabbos. That's the drasha. Okay? That's a good drasha. Rava says, yeah, but this drasha is not sufficient because, so basically it should be a blanket rule. When Rosh Hashanah is Shabbos, no shofar. When Rosh Hashanah is a weekday, yes, shofar. Why do we have a distinction? Well, it depends. Are you in the mikdash or not? Or do you have a beistin or not? Well, you're not accounting for this. And also, you should just know it's a little bit of a difficulty because sounding the shofar is not a malacha. Why would it be prohibited? Before Chazal showed up, there was no reason to prohibit the sounding of musical instruments or any shofar or anything like that on Shabbos because it has nothing to do with malacha. The only reason why for example, we do not play trumpets on Shabbos ourselves is why? Lest we come to fix those trumpets, right? We don't play guitar because you might tune the guitar or fix a string. That's a malacha. So it's a gzera lest you come to do a malacha. And Rava answers that basically he rejects this proposed drasha, I guess, or this once, if I can use the word again, twice in one sheer juxtaposition between the psukim. He says a gzera like Rava says. You cannot sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah lest someone who sounds the shofar says, "Oops, I have a question about this." He'll carry the shofar to the chacham. He'll leave the Rosh Hashanah and enter the Rosh Hashanah or walk through the Rosh Hashanah holding the shofar, which is strictly forbidden. You're not supposed to go out on Shabbos carrying things, right? That's a general rule, and it's the same prohibition we have regarding what lulav on Shabbos and Megillah on Shabbos. And by the way, we'll also point out what the Vilna Gaon says about lulav on Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael. It's reminiscent of what Rabbi Barchim's been arguing. Well, that's a trailer for the next thing. And this makes sense. I made a note over here. After all, there are no corresponding drashot that make a sabbatical distinction between lulav and Megillah. The fact that sages prohibited carrying the lulav around on Shabbos on Sukkot and carrying the Megillah around on Shabbos, there's no drasha that says two or not. It's just a straight takana that Chazal made. So the drasha that the Gemara originally proposed is rejected by Rava. This thing, the difference between Zichron Teruah and Teruah. That's the way we have in this Gemara. And then the Gemara continues. We're skipping a few lines in the Gemara. They ask about Rabbi Elazar's statement. What's the Rabbi Elazar disagreed with Tanakama? Tanakama said you need a beistin, whatever that is. Rabbi Elazar says you need a higher standard of beistin, like in Yavne. And then the Amrulo said no, Tanakama's standard. So the Mishnah asks, what is the Amrulo voice, the third voice in the Mishnah, adding to the discussion? What's the mafkamina between the Amrulo and the Tanakama? And the Gemara says, Beidina de Akrai. Okay, based in Dakrai, which Rashi says, Latana Kama Takinon. The Tanakama would say a based in Dakrai could sound the shofar. Even if it's not the set based in of 23, the based in of 23 is on the move, they could still sound shofar. The Tana de Amrulo, the voice of the Amrulo, the third voice of the Mishnah after Rabbi Elazar, Savar Echad Yavne Vechad Kol Makom Shishbo based in Kavua Dum de Yavne. No, the based in has to be in its place. It has to be a based in of 23, but it can't be a mobile based in. Why would a based in of 23 be Akrai or be Kavua? Well, normally a based in has the place where they normally meet, right? Mm-hmm. The based in has a place where it normally meets. And sometimes that place is under construction, or sometimes there's a war going on, so the based in has to meet somewhere else. Lama Dover Dome. Do you think there was a group of scholars who formed a based in the Mir Yeshiva? I do not know, but I would imagine that in Mir in the 1930s, if there was some sort of monetary dispute, people good from Jews in Mir could show up at the yeshiva and ask for a based in to be formed so that they could hear a case. You know, they do it at other places. At YU, they make a based in sometimes, right? There's a based in for Mumminus. So what happened? What happened to the Mir in World War II? The Mir picked up and left, right? They were on the move, and they eventually found a place in Shanghai. So that would be if you had a based in of the Mir and they were on the move, wherever they sat down for that week, or they stopped for Shabbos, wherever it was when they were running away, east through Siberia to get to China. So that'd be Akrai. So Rashi says, according to the Tanakama, that based in of 23 would have standing. And according to the Amrulo, that based in would not have standing to sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And Rabbi Elazar still says, you don't, not just the based in of 23 to sound the shofar, you need an actual Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin Gadol at the sound of the shofar. That's the way Rashi understands this Gemara. In the Perishah Mishnayos, the Rambam understands this totally differently than Rashi, especially this line. According to the Rambam over here, let's read what Perishah Mishnayos. This is, I think, is Rav Kapach's translation. Echad Yavne Vechad Kol Makom Sheish Bo Deitin Rotzeh Lomar Afilu Haya Beitim B'Masa. Okay, they're traveling. V'chanu Be'ez Makom Lo Kedei Li'ashev Sham Rishayim L'Tkoa Sham V'Ein Halacha. According to the Amrulo, if the bastin's traveling, they stop for a minute. They are allowed to sound the shofar, but that's not halacha. Or I'll read it in English. According to the Tanakama, the court can sound the shofar Rosh Hashanah on the Sabbath only if it meets in its permanent place. You understand? Whereas according to the Amrulo, if the court meets in an unusual location, the Amrulo is talking about the Akrai, it could sound the shofar. And the halacha follows the Tanakama. Okay? So the halacha follows the Tanakama, no based in Akrai. That's why the Rambam says over here, remember in this halachas I said here, that it has to be based in Kavua V'Hushia Samuch Ba'aretz. It has to be the based in its place. It has to be Samuch Ba'aretz. Basically, the Gemara here is ambiguous. It says, Ika B'naihu Beit Din Akrai. That's the nafkamino. But who's talking about the Akrai based in? The Tanakama or the Amrulo, the third voice in the Mishnah? That's unclear. It's a machlokas Rashi and Rambam. And but yeah, it's flipped. And if you look over here, this is my Gemara in which I take my own notes. See, my copy of the Gemara, and you can see over here my notes on the margins. See, what? Yeah, well, you have to. What else do you do? And you have to take them with a pencil, otherwise you'll confuse yourself. According to the latter opinion, even if the court is in transit, it can then sound the horn. That's rejected by the halacha. That's the Rambam's opinion. The Amrulo says, based on Akrai, can sound the shofar, but that's rejected by halacha because it's not the Tanakama. Rashi has the understanding reversed. That is, according to the Tanakama, a court in transit does not sound the shofar. Okay? Nafkamina practice, according to Rashi. So basically, you could have such a thing. And by the way, the Vilna Gaon was alluding to this. So what's the Vilna Gaon's, let's look back at the Vilna Gaon. Which opinion was he endorsing? The Masha Kasacham based in Dakrai, the Komakom based in Samach Berit Yisrael Ba'inan. There was a whole case. Based in Dakrai was an Nafkamina, but you need a based in Samach. That's the Vilna Gaon's first statement, like the Rambam. And then he mentions Rashi and the Rush's opinion of understanding Gemara, which also is not fulfilled by us. And he mentions the Rif, which was rejected. Of all these three opinions, which one do you think the Vilna Gaon is endorsing?
He spoke very fast and I missed something.
Okay, so one more time. Explaining this statement in the Shulchan Aruch that we don't sound the shofar on Shabbos, on Rosh Hashanah, so the Vilna Gaon brings Rambam's understanding. Mm-hmm. Okay, he brings why? Explains Allah Rambam's understanding. He then gives, and according to the Rashi Rosh of the Torah, you have a different requirement to meet, a beis din of 23. And they both disagree with the Rif, who had a requirement that doesn't make much sense. Everybody rejects what the Rif says. Which of these opinions is the Vilna Gaon going with? The first one. So they're both disagreeing with this. He says he's explaining the halacha using who? The Rambam. He mentions also the Rashi and Rosh say differently, and the Rif is rejected. So my hunch is that, what? Yes, please.
The grass is Mikol Makom Bet Din Samuch Beretz Yisrael Ba'inan. But the actual quote from the Rambam, it says Bet Din Kavua B'hu She'yeh Samuch Beretz Ba'aretz. So he's missing the critical word Kavua.
And he also mentioned the part of Kidshu Esachodesh.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's not quoting exactly. According to you could say that maybe the Vilna Gaon's Iker is Samuch Beretz Yisrael Ba'inan. You know? It's a very complicated thing. I don't think that there's anything that's certain here. You know? Why? Because unfortunately, for a lot of things that wasn't relevant, the Gaon did not sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos. He didn't think that he qualified in any way. So the question is, which of these opinions would he say you have to fulfill? Maybe you have to fulfill both. My feeling is that he prefers the Rambam because he brings that first. But I don't know. You know, there's he's just showing us what where to find this. So let's see another question over here. So you can understand how the Rif understood this exchange. The Rif was basically saying you need a beis din, right? The Mishnah doesn't say beis din of 23. Rabbi Eliezer says you need a beis din like Yavne, like a Sanhedrin. But the Tanna Kama says you just need a beis din. And that's it. So the Rif, you can understand what it is. I didn't even put a color here for the Rif. So you see this question on the screen. Which understand this Mishnah and Gemara does the Vilna Gaon follow? That of Rif, Rashi, or Rambam? I don't have a straight answer. I have my hunch, but I don't have a proof. Understand? Okay. There is a later stage of the Targum on Daf Lamed. What's important is this is brought up as a challenge along over here that a brisa that Rav Sheshes brings that has a statement over here that Rashi rejects the halacha. Okay, let's read this brisa. Shaveh Yovel Rosh Hashanah l'tkiya levrachos el shebe Yovel b'Shabbat tokein bein b'veitin shekitshu bo atachodesh uvein b'veitin shelo kitshu bo atachodesh. The din of the brachas and Shmona Esrei and the actual sound of the shofar on Yovel is what do you call it? Is the same for Yovel for the Jubilee year as it is for Rosh Hashanah. Hold on one second. Hold on. Okay. Fine. Next, v'chol yachid v'yachid chayav litkola u'v'Rosh Hashanah lo hayu tukim el v'veitin shekitshu bo atachodesh. Okay. Everybody has to sound the shofar on Yovel, and it says in Rosh Hashanah they would only sound the shofar on Shabbos in a beis din that sanctified the moon. Okay. And Rashi adds, this is the green letters. This is Rashi's commentary. Kishachal liyot b'Shabbat, where Rosh Hashanah was on Shabbos. Ela b'veitin agadol shel Sanhedrin agadolah hamekachidus achodashim v'Rabbi Eliezer he. Sorry, Rabbi Eliezer he. Rashi says that this line, the Gemara, that the only place they would sound the shofar is in a beis din that sanctified the moon. Opinion. This fits rejected opinion from the Mishnah. Okay. Yavne. Do it. Rashi interprets Sanhedrin Gedolah. So this line over here in the Gemara, which says that Rosh Hashanah they only sound the shofar on Shabbos, it's based in that sanctify the new moon, is Rabbi Eliezer, but and I try to put over here my own Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. But the problem is the Rambam holds of this halacha. According to the way the Rambam understands the Mishnah and the ensuing Gemara, this line that the base in Kitchua Chodesh is Yerushalmi. We see that Yerushalmi touches on the same points as the Bavli, but backwards. Okay, the Gemara, obviously, the Yerushalmi is working the same Mishnah. The Yerushalmi begins with Rav Papa recounting that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish actually were sitting, and they were asking kashas. Amrin, and they said, Tanina, let's look in the Mishnah. Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah Shechal Yom Shabbat B'Mikdash Yutoki Neva Lo B'Medina. When Rosh Hashanah was on Shabbos, they would sound the shofar in the Mikdash, but not in the Medina, wherever that is.
That's outside the Beit HaMikdash.
Whatever it is, the Medina, there's a place. Mikdash, yes. Medina, no. The question is, how far Shabbos? And they asked the same kasha that we have over here for Rava's kasha, mitzvah of the Torah, Af Bagvul Yidche, shofar is a Shabbos. So even in the Gvulin, which they understand as Medina, Medina means the Gvulin. By the way, so this fits who's understanding of Medina and Mikdash? Rambam, because they equate Medina with the Gvulin. Okay? Someone would say Medina means the walled city of Jerusalem as opposed to the Mikdash. But here it says Gvulin, the outskirts. Everywhere else, the Gvul of Eretz Yisrael. So they say if shofar is an actual mitzvah and it overrides Shabbos in the Mikdash, it should override Shabbos even beyond the Mikdash. In letu Dvar Torah, and if you're not supposed to be sounding the shofar on Shabbos, minat Torah, Mikdash lo yircheh. So even the Mikdash, the shofar shouldn't override Shabbos. Right? Why is there a difference between whether you sound the shofar in the Mikdash or not? Sorry, why is there a distinction? Shofar on Shabbos, well, are you in the Mikdash or not? Hold on a second, there's someone who can't get in. Okay. So that's a question. So this is the question that Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan had. And they say, well, what do you need? Okay. So Kahana was walking by. And they said, oh, he's a great man. Let's ask him this question. And so he came and they asked him. And he gave them what? The distinction between the psukim, the juxtaposition. There's Zichron Trua and Yom Trua. Shabbathon Zichron Trua. He says, when it's Shabbos, then it's just Zichron Trua. Recount the Trua. When it's not Shabbos, actual Yom Trua. But does that answer the question? No, because, okay, so it should be blanket. Shabbos, shofar. Shabbos, no shofar. Kol, yes, shofar. But the problem is, on Shabbos, we make a distinction between certain places, not a blanket. And by the way, the Yerushalmi is a little bit repetitive. It has a similar story with Rav Zeira telling the friends, his colleagues, go hear what Levi has a drasha, Rabbi Levi, because he always says great things. Okay? Everything he says is worthwhile. And he said the same thing. They went up to him and they asked him, there's a distinction between Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, and weekday Rosh Hashanah. Sometimes it's Zichron Trua, that's Shabbos, when you only recount the Trua. And sometimes it's Yom Trua, when you actually sound the shofar. That's a weekday. So this answer is given twice, but it's incomplete. The Yerushalmi then asks, Me'ata, that you don't have shofar on Shabbos, after Mikdash lo yidcheh. Shofar is a Shabbos. You have to add like the Korban Nesanel and the Pnei Moshe add. If you're not supposed to sound the shofar on Shabbos, that's Rosh Hashanah, so why do it in the base of Mikdash at all? And the answer they're given is Tana be'echad lachodesh. It says be'echad lachodesh you sound the shofar. That's written in what do you call it, in Pinchas, where it talks about Yom Trua. Be'echad lachodesh hashvi Yom Trua yelechem. Me'ata afilu b'makom shehein yodin shehu be'echad lachodesh yidcheh. In the place where they have true knowledge that it is actually the first of the seventh month, they're the ones who push aside this rule of no shofar on Shabbos. Generally speaking, no shofar on Shabbos because it's Zichron Trua. But the people who know that it's actually Echad b'Shabbos, they can sound the shofar. And who are they, by the way? The people who make Kiddush HaChodesh. So this is the source for Rambam's opinion. Okay? This is the source. That's why I highlighted in blue. That's why the Rambam says the ones who are Kiddush HaChodesh. And this might be the answer to Leon's question. The ones who actually know it's Rosh Hashanah today, because they're the ones who are deciding that it's not the 30th of Elul, but rather the 1st of Tishrei. Because after all, that's basically their job to determine the day after the 29th of Elul. Is it just another day of Elul, or is it actually Rosh Hashanah?
That's right.
So they're the ones who do it. But Malcolm Shem Yodim, but it necessarily doesn't mean for certain the ones who Makadish this Chodesh. Okay. Because the ones who Makadish the Chodesh generally are the ones who are always Makadish the Chodesh. Okay. So that's the source. And then there's an alternate answer to this last kasha is also offered. Rabbi Yishim Bar Yochai, well Ben Yochai, because Yerushalmi. Vikpraftem, the Makom Shak Korbanot Pravin. The next pasuk says Vikpraftem Olah. Bring a burnt offering to God in the place where the korbanos are done. So in the mikdash, you have this rule. Even though generally speaking, you're not supposed to sound the shofar on Shabbos at Rosh HaShanah because Zichron Trua, today is Zichron Trua, not a regular Trua, because you're in the place of Vikpraftem, you do it. So even though the shofar should not be sounded, I should do this. In the temple, a drasha connecting the sound of the shofar to sacrifice allows the sound of the shofar on the Sabbath in the temple. Okay? So wait a second. Yes, please.
Those two answers given by Rashbi, are they complementary, or is it that he gives one answer?
No, the first answer over here in blue is not Rashbi.
Those two answers. Are they like both equally correct, or is it one of them says about anywhere that they know that it's a new month, and then the Yerushalmi for some reason doesn't like that, so they give the Rashbi opinion, or are both of them correct?
Okay, because so I don't know about correct. I can't. I'm not allowed to make judgments like that. I'm just trying to tell you that Rambam brings this one in blue, but he does not bring this one over here, and neither does Rashi and Rif. All the posts can ignore this line over here. See? Right.
The Mishnah says in the Mikdash, not in the Beit Din.
It says,
so that's kind of difficult with the first answer.
Yeah, but our Gemara explains to us the Mikdash because that's where the Beis Din was. Because the ones in the Mikdash, it's not the Kohanim of the Mikdash, it's the sages who compose the Sanhedrin at the Mikdash. The ones who are Smuchim, in this case, not ordained, but adjacent to the Mikdash. Okay? It's a little bit of a cute drasha. So I asked this question: why do none of the Rishonim pick up on this latter exposition? That's what I'm asking you. So I have here. Anybody know what this is? This is we're going to mention this Rabbi Antelman's Yerushalmi.
Moshe Antelman?
Yeah, Rabbi Marvin Moshe Antelman.
Oh,
well, it's mine now, so you can't have it.
No, it's so. I have a copy
you heard of him?
Of some of his books.
Okay, to eliminate the opiate. Okay, you get them as PDFs online.
Yeah.
So I have to thank the Atars for allowing me the possession of his Aruch HaShulchan and his Yerushalmi.
Wow.
Yeah, I inherited them. So what? Yeah, I know. I have a lot of Yerushalmi. Thank God. It's good to have smart. So I'll open up my notes here. You have to take notes in the margins, otherwise you're not going to get anywhere, right? Which is why I find it very difficult to learn Gemara on Shabbos. I can't learn Gemara on Shabbos because I can't take notes. You know, or Yontif for that matter. So you have to learn other things. According to one opinion, what are you supposed to be learning on Shabbos? Nothing new. You're supposed to just review. So you won't be need to writing. So that's what you really should do. Okay. So I'd like to point out something that this drasha isn't the most solid because it also implies that if God forbid there's no korban, then you shouldn't sound the shofar. Right? The first one says if you don't have the people who established Rosh Chodesh, established the calendar, so no shofar blowing, and that makes sense. You know, because they're the ones they're the ones who have to be in charge of it, and they're the ones who are Zrizim, they're the ones who are not going to do an Isser. But why do you connect the shofar blowing to another mitzvah that you can't fulfill sometimes? And by the way, you should know, and I have this over here, the source in the Rambam, where the Rambam basically explains that this whole idea that the Jewish people will always be making the calendar. Remember, our set calendar, the Rambam says, we don't keep Rosh HaShanna this coming 2 Shabbos from today. It's not because of a set calendar, it's because the Beis Din, the Jewish community in Israel, which will always be everlasting, even if it dwindles to very small, it has the authority. There's no such thing as no Jewish community, Klal Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael, and it's their authority. So you can, according to Rambam, you could have the unfortunate circumstance where the Mikdash is Mivutal. The Mizbeach is Mivutal, the Korbanos are Mivutal. The Korbanos, many days don't happen. Too much of history that has been Korbanos. But the corporate entity that is Klal Yisrael that exists, that creates the Jewish calendar, is eternal, like we talked about earlier today. So this drasha doesn't really fit the Rambam's hashkafa. which he wouldn't bring it, because it connects these two mitzvahs too much. At least the way the Rashbi is saying. That's why I'm offering. That's the first technical answer. It implies that if you have no korbanos, then you would have no shofar blowing. And the Torah didn't necessarily want you to say, well, if you didn't do this mitzvah, then don't do that mitzvah. That doesn't really make sense.
How does that imply the other one? If it's just the makom shekorbanot krivin, if the makom is the same.
Present tense, kraftem.
Oh, okay. I see. Interesting.
You didn't craft them, so you don't do it. Here it says, it's very simple. We understand. They're saying a place. If you sanctified the moon, you established it's Rosh Hashanah, so you can sound the shofar. That fits with what we see elsewhere. The Beis Din that sanctifies the moon, they get to say that's certainly Rosh Hashanah, so they can override the drasha of Zichron Trua. But this one is a little bit harsh. Also, by the way, it doesn't account for the places outside Jerusalem. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had the power on Shabbos, by the way. If this drasha is so strong like the Rishalmi brings, how did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai extend the permission to sound shofar on Shabbos from what used to be the temple to now Yavne and any other place where there's a Beis Din? How did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai do that? It must be that this is the overriding rule. The people who establish the new moon, wherever they are, have the power to sound the shofar even on Shabbos. That's why this one's brought la'alacha. Okay, as per the Mishnah, that's what the Mishnah seems to be saying. It wasn't the mikdash per se that allowed them to sound the shofar on Shabbos, but the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin that's at the mikdash. And when the Sanhedrin left the mikdash and moved to Yavne, they continued. They still had that power. That was what Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was able to establish. At least the way the Rishalmi says it. Remember, according to Rishalmi, what's the power to sound? What's the overriding rule? No shofar on Shabbos, right? Against the Bavli. Okay? The Bavli said it's Gzera of Rabbah, no shofar on Shabbos. The Bavli rejected that at least according to Rava rejected that drasha, so to speak. But the Rishalmi goes with the drasha. The drasha says no shofar on Shabbos. It's Yom Zichron Trua. So how do they do in the mikdash? Because they're the ones who established the calendar, and that's why Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai could extend that permission to a court beyond the base of mikdash, and that's the way the Rambam paskins. By the way, the Rambam doesn't bring this. So that's the two answers I try to give. I know that's not so certain, but I think those are legitimate answers to this second question. And as for the third question, so why does Maimonides cite Rabbah's Babylonian description of the enactment against shofar? The Rambam seems to go both with the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. The Rambam says that, it's a Gzera. He mentions the Gzera of Rabbah. If Yerushalmi has a prominent explanation to explain these halachot, you could just go with Yerushalmi straight. Okay? And the answer I like to give is the way the Rambam explains other things. You could look, for example, let's take one of the rabbi's favorite examples, Tefillin on Chol Moed. The Rambam says the Isser Malach on Chol Moed is entirely D'Rabbanan. Whatever Isser Malach exists is a Siyag D'Rabbanan. Wait a minute, if you open up Chagiga has a few what look like drushes that the Isser Malacha on seemingly biblical source for Isser Malacha on Chol Moed. So the Isser Malacha on Chol Moed, whatever it may be, is D'Oraisa, like many Rishonim say. And the Rambam says, yeah, but those are all smachtas because all those drushes are against Pshat. When it talks about Chol Moed, what does it always say? The first day don't do malacha, the last day don't do malacha, implying that the intervening days you can do malacha. Both for Sukkot and Pesach it says that, right? The first day don't do malacha is a mikra kodesh, the last day is no malacha mikra kodesh, or atzeres, whatever it is. Whereas implying the middle days, and the drasha is, no, even the middle days you can't do malacha. So the Rambam calls that just an asmachta. So I believe that here the Rambam would say this basic rule in the Yerushalmi, the Zichron Trua and the Trua juxtaposition. Sometimes it's Zichron Trua, sometimes it's regular Trua, meaning Zichron Trua is a Shabbos, and Yom Trua, when it's a weekday, is just an asmachta. Why? And this is a very important point. Think about this. How often is Rosh Hashanah actually on Shabbos? Before we had Lo Adu Rosh as a rule, mathematically on average, Rosh Hashanah was one every 7 years on Shabbos. Because Rosh Hashanah is the moon goes across all the days of the week. So if you average it out over a course of hundreds of thousands of years, you'll get that just like regular Rosh Chodesh falls on all the days of the week equally, even today. So too, the new moon of Tishrei would fall out on Shabbos once every 7. But we have Lo Adu Rosh and Molad Zakein, which basically makes it that Rosh Hashanah is now 2 out of every 7 years. All the times it was supposed to be on Friday gets pushed to Shabbos also. Basically, it's 2 out of 7 Thursday, 2 out of 7 Shabbos, 2 out of 7 Monday, and 1 out of 7 Tuesday. That's the general percentages of when Rosh Hashanah falls out. How are you supposed to be B'kayim, Zichron Trua, every year, most of the years? 5 out of 7 years, or 6 out of 7 years, Rosh Hashanah is not Shabbos. How do you fulfill the Zichron Trua aspect in those cases?
Did you say Shofar oath?
Yes.
Stuff?
And the answer is Zichron Trua. What is Pshat and Zichron Trua? And this is something that I have to say. For those of you who didn't get my recent printing of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, which I recommend you do. By the way, do you have your copy? You have to buy your copy now. Self-promotion. We mentioned this 2 weeks ago. We finally got them in print. For those of you who ordered by mail, we have a major mail problem here, but we're going to give it to you. If we're going to come to you in person and deliver it to you if we have to, because we have no other way to get it here. This came out 4 years ago. So you need a copy of this. In this, we point out that the Mefarshim understand what is Zichron Trua. Pshat and Zichron Trua. What's Azkaratha of a Korban? Yale Zichronenu. Yalev Yavo V'Yagia V'Yareh Zichronenu Fikdonenu. What does it mean that our Zikaron goes up to God? What is Yom HaZikaron, for crying out loud? What does Zikaron mean? Well, Vayu Lachem Zikaron Lifnei Elokechem. So you point out, Zikaron means, Zichron Trua means, in Pshat, and this is the way Rabbi Akiva has in his drasha, the act of sounding the shofar and accompanying it with the recitations of the Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros is accepted by God as though it is a korban. You understand? There sometimes a korban is made out of meal, flour, and oil. Sometimes it's water. Sometimes it's wine. Sometimes it's wood. Sometimes it's incense. Sometimes it's meat. Sometimes Rahman Alibabai. Sometimes it's your actual prayers. We offer prayers to God instead of korbanos. And sometimes the actual recitations and the sounding of the shofar or the horns in the temple, that's also the service. That's what God wants, right? So Zichron Trua in most years, it doesn't mean, oh, if it's Shabbos, don't sound the shofar. Instead, describe sounding the shofar. In most years, Zichron Trua means your sounding of the shofar, along with the recitation of Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofros, is accepted by God as a korban. And this thesis has been proved. Like I said, Rav Tzuriel helped me put this together. He really liked that one. You can go see it. It's an essay in here. It's also available online for free in English. So you could go find that. So that's why I think the Rambam brings Rabba's opinion in the Bafli. Namely that the Iker reason for not saying the shofar on Shabbos outside of Beis Din is lest you come to violate Shabbos, and Beis Din is the reason, which is also a good reason why the Rambam accepts this drush over here, Be'echad LaChodesh, the people who sanctify the moon, they can sound the shofar, but he doesn't accept this one of Rashbi, that it has to do with where the korbanos are brought, because sometimes the Beis Din is not in the Beis HaMikdash, and they still sound the shofar. And that's not the reason for it. It's not connected to korbanos at all. I hope that answers that question. And so now, what's my opinion? When someone asks my opinion, I think that the Rambam is very clear. You have to fulfill a certain condition. Yerushalmi certainly is clear. At least according to one opinion, Yerushalmi over here, not Rashbi. You need the Beis Din. That's the ones who are, by the way, in order to be able to do Kiddush HaChodesh, they have to be what? They have to be smuchim. That's a condition just to be able to do this. So first, show me a Beis Din that is properly ordained. And at least once they did Kiddush HaChodesh and they established our calendar just 1 month out of the last few, dozens of months. Every year we have at least a dozen months, right? If you show me a qualified Beis Din that has done that, then maybe we could start talking. Yes, okay, there are people who declare that they're like the Rif. The Rif was rejected. The Rosh and the Tur have certainly what to rely on. That's Rashi and the Rosh. But Rashi and Rosh do not go with what? The Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi is authoritative. So the Rambam, the way he understands Yerushalmi and resolves it with the Bavli is very good. I think the Rambam wins only because the Rambam accounts for both Talmudim and all the questions that we compose here. So yeah, I would say that the Rambam standard is necessary to sound the shofar this coming Rosh Hashanah. But then again, I'm not the one in charge, so it doesn't really matter.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.